Scale is the blockchain that's truly built different. Forget gas fees and waiting. Scale offers a seamless Web3 experience with fast, fee free transactions. Whether it's gaming, AI, or next gen dApps, Scale is here to power your future. Explore more at scale.space/ecosystem and follow them on X at Scale Network. This episode is sponsored by Ledger. This Black Friday, Ledger is offering an incredible deal to secure your digital assets. From November 29th to December 5th, upgrade to Ledger Flex and get $70 in Bitcoin. Plus, save up to 40% on select Ledger Nano wallets and accessories. These deals are only available while supplies last, so don't wait. Visit Ledger's website at ledger.com today to take advantage of the best offers of the year and protect your assets with the global leader in digital asset security. Meet Kraken Institutional. Whether you're an asset allocator, a trading firm, or high net worth individual, Kraken Institutional unlocks the powerful tools you and your organization need to trade and manage crypto at scale. Reliable, easy to integrate, with white glove service and 24/7 support. Visit kraken.com/institutions and get in touch today. This is not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss and is offered to U.S. customers through Payword Interactive Inc. View legal disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Forward Guidance. And joining me today is Dan Tapiero, Managing Partner, CEO, and CIO of Tenti Holdings. Dan, really great to get you on the show finally. How are you doing?
I'm good. I would just complete my title by also saying I have the same title for One Roundtable Partners, Tenti and One RT, manage a portfolio, as you may or may not know, of companies, private companies in the digital asset space. And then I'm also chairman of a company that we're operating called Zenrock Labs. And we can get into that if you want. It's a little deep in the weeds. We are coming out with our first product next month, which is get this, a decentralized yield-bearing wrapped Bitcoin product for DeFi users. So it's a pretty deep in the weeds, if you're deep into the crypto DeFi degen world, something that you might want. But anyway,
that's fascinating.
Sorry to go on there a little bit, but I wear a whole bunch of different hats.
Yeah, you really do, and I think that's a good goal for our conversation today. Let's get people up to speed enough that they can understand what you just said and what are some of the unique propositions of that. We can do our best shot here, but before we get into that, for those that haven't heard about you and your storied global macro career before you're in the weeds of private equity on the digital asset side of things, how did you get from where you started to where you are today? What's the story there, just to get people up to speed?
Well, I'm an old guy, so it's a long story. I mean, I started my career in the early 90s, really, at Tiger Management, and I was in the global macro group there. So I was doing bonds, currencies, emerging markets, commodities. Most of Tiger, really, they're all the Tiger Cubs, et cetera, are focused on long short equity, or they were, and most of them are retired now. But then I was in the hedge fund business for 20 plus years, ended up working for Michael Steinhardt as well, where I was head of macro research and ran a portfolio there with two other guys. And then was at SAC Capital for 10 years and ran macro investment there, ran my own portfolio, worked for Stan Druckenmiller as well at Duquesne, where I ran my own portfolio. So I have a 16-year, track record that was managing a portfolio day to day, moment to moment, week to week, month to month, live mark to market in macro trading. And I was always looking for structural changes in the world and, then placing bets. And there were periods where I was very focused on one area versus another. I mean, in the 90s, it was mostly European bonds and currencies and some treasury, broader fixed income. In the early 2000s, I started to focus on gold more, and on emerging markets, and then agriculture in the later, 2000s. So I sort of jump around based upon where I think that there is a structural change in the world happening. I mean, in the early 2000s, for instance, China came into the market and they really impacted commodities markets in a way that really didn't, they weren't really a player in the 90s. Commodities markets, there were no, the Chinese didn't affect the supply demand balances. So that was like a big, macro shift. And then gold became a focus of mine after '08. I kept thinking to myself, the whole system actually would have gone under if they hadn't saved Goldman and Morgan Stanley and turned them into banks. And I thought, well, this is, how are they doing this? They'll eventually have negative real interest rates to bail everybody out. And this is the debasement of fiat. There was currency. There was a period, it's funny. I mean, there was a period probably in the 90s and 2000s where people didn't really know what that meant, the debasement of fiat currency. Today, especially if you're in the crypto space and you're on X, and it's just more commonly understood. It was like 25 guys who sat around worrying about the fact that fiat was being debased with negative interest rates, right? Negative real interest rates. And so in '08, '09, I thought, well, my goodness, I want to not just own gold. I want to own a gold business. I want to own a physical gold business. I started a company called GBI, Gold Bullion International, that sells and stores physical gold. And it's still a bustling business now. It's really, actually this year was booming. It's been almost 14 years. My co-founder partner still runs that business. And, I just thought, look, if we're going to have negative 3% real interest rates, this was in 2010, 12, 14, after 10 years, I've lost like half my savings. So I was really nervous about that. Like, how does that work? Yes, you can put your money into stocks, and stocks have done great, but that's a different risk than cash. And so I started using gold really as like a cash proxy. I didn't want my cash being debased that way. And gold has actually done really well. I started that company in '08. The gold was like $700, and now it's $2,600. So it's held up, it's held up pretty well. But that concept, dealing with that macro problem of how do I safeguard all my assets, all my cash from being debased away after the '08 crisis. And unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough in '09 to read the Satoshi white paper and understand that basically he invented, the digital way to hedge yourself against fiat debasement. I was sort of still in the old world, so I started a physical gold business. And then I understood Bitcoin a little bit, but I didn't really understand it because there were too many terms surrounding Bitcoin that I didn't get. If you read the Satoshi white paper, what is it? 8 pages, 11 footnotes. But there are all these terms that didn't make any sense to me, like the proof of work algorithm. Like that underpins the whole thing. What is that? I wasn't a math guy. I didn't really know what that meant. I wasn't a cryptographer. I didn't understand that at all. How did that work? Wasn't a computer coder either. So it's like, oh, okay, it's code. There's value in code. That didn't make any sense to me either. So it took me quite a while to actually, honestly, probably about 5 years to sort of come around to believing that Bitcoin had the similar principles to gold, and then of course a ton of other things. I think it's really basic and simple just to say, okay, it's digital gold, but it really is a permanent ledger, a verified ledger with no central counterparty acting as the verifier. It's a verification machine is kind of how I talked about it. And you mentioned you spoke to Raul Pal yesterday, and he was the first guy I spoke to about my ideas in the space of 2019. And we did this one interview, and I had never really spoken publicly about anything. and it got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm onto something. But it was this concept that um, the Bitcoin network, the network of blockchains, was really a validation mechanism. And so the idea that not only would your sort of cash or your dollars or your value be validated on this network, but theoretically, everything that has any value at all could be placed on a blockchain and be sort of cemented there as proof, um, as undeniable proof. So eventually, like you could have all like key documents, for instance, you have all transactions of all kind. You could have, all your hard assets, RWAs, right? Real world asset tokenization is about having your real world assets somehow verified and stamped somewhere on a blockchain. And there are many different blockchains. They have different use cases. I think people need to understand that the code that underlies the Bitcoin blockchain, that's the key code. Every other blockchain, Ethereum, Solana, all of them are just forks. They're derivations off the original Bitcoin code. And they've been tweaked to have specific use cases. So I saw this world of this massive lattice work of blockchains that was going to develop. And then I launched a private equity fund. It's now 10T and 1RT. And, we invested in the private companies in the space that are really building, this vast sort of lattice work, this network of blockchains. People call it the picks and shovels approach. We don't actually own any cryptocurrency directly. But I would tell your listeners here that, if they're just dipping their toes into the space for the first time, you go out there and you allocate whatever it is, 3, 4, 5% of your portfolio. It used to be, I would say 1%, but I would say now it's at least 3%. You buy a little Bitcoin, you buy a little bit of Ethereum, maybe you put some money into a venture fund, and then you put some money into a growth type fund, which is what we do. We don't really do venture. And that's I think that's your starter portfolio into the space.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. It's really interesting hearing that experience you had, because I feel like that sets you up for the ideal background to understand the macro benefits of Bitcoin and crypto as a whole. But it feels like it could have gone either way for you and many others in your situation, where it's either you spend those years learning and then rethinking your framework. You were deep in gold and gold miners and gold companies, and basically flipped your perspective completely. But there's others that may have done the opposite and have done the opposite. What do you feel like was that?
Yeah, what is the opposite? You mean
the opposite
is
probably rejecting, remaining as that gold bug, and remaining in that world and being cynical of this new version of that, this digital version of that. What do you feel like was the catalyst to be able to go down that route and not the other? Because it feels like sometimes people get caught up in the
Yeah, I think it's just more work. I honestly, it took me quite a while. And then, price helped me. In 2019, the market corrected 90%. And I'd seen that a lot in markets. There's also a market component to this. And the price was just so low. And so I started buying. And then, when you buy a new position, you start doing more and more work. And I literally, for 6 months, locked myself in my office in my house in Greenwich, and just, I probably read 100 different, articles and listened to 100 podcasts. And the more you learn and the more you don't give up and push ahead, the probability is that you'll find something there that, of value. I think there's a little sort of saying on Twitter or X, no one has ever done the real deep dive into crypto and then said it was garbage. It's very difficult especially for older people, because it's a completely new conceptual framework and it's outside of everything that's existed before. So you kind of have to be a little bit, I wouldn't call it a maverick, but you have to be a little bit of a pioneer. You have to believe that, this is completely new territory. I say to people sometimes, I feel like it's 1840 and I'm heading west. I'm heading west past, Kansas, and very few people have even made it to California, right? And it's that kind of thing where at some point you see it, you kind of can't believe that this whole world exists out there. But to be honest, that was, I entered the space initially in 2013, and then, it wasn't really into 2019 that I really went, I did those hundreds of hours. But I, I, I think today you've got $5 trillion of value in the space, right? It's 3.5 to $4 trillion is the value of all the cryptocurrencies. And then I add another trillion for the value of all the businesses in the space. That's not really debatable anymore. When I had the idea for the first fund in the middle of 2019, the space had 300 billion. So it's already up almost 15 times. That's 5 years. Like, how many things go up 15 times in 5 years? So I don't really know if it's debatable anymore. You know what I'm
I think,
saying?
yeah, I mean, especially today, right? Like we're going through this seismic shift in the past month, even like, and I'm curious your thoughts. Like, we understand Bitcoin's proposition for the individual, digital gold, but I'm curious on your perspective on it for the sovereign level, right? So now we have Trump who just won the election. There's a lot of talk about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Where do you see Bitcoin falling into the big global macro story? Where does it sit in terms of like a sovereign, collateral asset or strategic reserve?
Well, I don't really know how a Bitcoin reserve would work. The central bank has reserves and they hold different assets and currencies. Foreign central banks uh, tend to have to be more active in how they manage their currencies because the Fed is generally dollar based. I think, and it probably just holds a lot of treasuries. Foreign central banks, I mean, like you have El Salvador that's decided to hold Bitcoin. Um, I don't really know how easy it is to establish a national Bitcoin reserve. You'd have to have the central bank and the treasury buy into that. I think it's a good idea, but I'm just not sure how actionable that is. Um, just make like logistically, I wouldn't know how. I don't know how it works, how it would work. But I think for foreign countries, especially that are uh, having a more diverse portfolio of reserves, I think it makes a lot of sense. You could certainly diversify some of your cash holdings into Bitcoin and treat it like you would a currency. You'd have dollars, you'd have euro, you have some yen maybe, and then um, you'd have some Bitcoin. So I think we're moving in that direction. What I'm more excited about in the U.S. is that the regulatory landscape seems to have pivoted, and it's pivoted extremely quickly, 180 degrees. I mean, it was just 2 months ago, and everyone in the space, certainly all the large players, were being attacked in one form or another, whether it was by Congress people or whether it was the SEC or whether it was some regulators somewhere. There's so many different agencies in the US. And now all of a sudden you have a president that owns cryptocurrency. You've got, his right hand guy, Elon Musk, is a big proponent. You have the entire cabinet. You have huge numbers of people in Congress. So I just have this feeling that it's possible, excuse me, it's possible that the US becomes like a hub for cryptocurrency innovation and blockchain innovation. whether it's companies or foundations that set up new tokens, or whether it's businesses involved, in Web3 somehow. It just feels like it all changed. And I don't think it's ever been as positive as it is today in terms of the backdrop. And I think we're going to have a renaissance in US DeFi. So that's US DeFi, decentralized finance, has been sort of on the back foot for the last 2.5 years. And the TVL, which is the total value that's locked in DeFi, is around 100 billion. I can see that getting to $1 trillion in the next, 2 years, certainly. So, and that's people moving around their currency, borrowing and lend, and sort of acting as their own bank.
Yeah, I'm curious if you agree with this or not, but it feels like over the past 4 years we've figured out the use cases, and you're deep in the weeds of even the picks and shovels for those use cases like DeFi and stablecoin payments, etc. It's just there's been this regulatory hampering and just basically stopping it from actually occurring. So I'm curious, like, do you agree with that? And what are you most excited in terms of with the regulatory doors blown wide open? Is it things like DeFi, tokenizing, even like equities and that sort of thing? What's got you most excited from that perspective?
Yeah, I think I think self custody is also connected into that, and I think Ledger, which we're an investor in, has their Flex and Stacks products that have just come out. I think, right, because once you've purchased your Bitcoin or ETH, you pull it off exchange. You have it on your ledger, your hard drive, and you have self custody your own value, which I think is an incredible feeling. I mean, to walk around, as they say, with a Swiss bank in your wallet, right? Like your own private holdings that only you really are aware of. I mean, it's a phenomenal feeling. And then, the whole interaction. This is through Ledger Live, and there are other platforms that are gateways into DeFi. You can stake your cryptocurrency, learn about that to generate yield. You can borrow, lend, swap, purchase NFTs. There's all sorts of different things that hold hold your. I don't know if you're a gamer. I'm not really a gamer, but all sorts of gaming value as well that can be held, and self custody. I think that's sort of a magical kind of thing that it's all there just on your little thumbnail drop, right? So I think that is, and mobile, right? And it's mobile. I think that sensation, that feeling, that's the beginning. I don't know if that's too vague, but I don't know. At least for me, that was sort of phenomenal. Like it wasn't in a bank.
Hmm. Totally. It's interesting you bring up the self custody thing. Something and I'm curious your thoughts as somebody that's come from the TradFi side and trade to fixed income is what's been going on with MicroStrategy and your perspective and read on that. Do you see that as genius, or do you see that as just a pure bold play? And do you have any concerns there, or do you
Well,
just
it's
feel like
both. I think it's a pure bold play, and it is sort of genius. I mean, he's essentially just borrowing money from the fiat world, which has an unlimited supply there's unlimited supply of fiat dollars and euros or whatever it is, and he's investing it into a hard asset where there's a limited supply. There's only 21 million Bitcoin, and so he could borrow theoretically an infinite amount of money in the fiat world because fiat is infinite, and invest it into a scarce asset. So I see it as a very elegant way to take advantage of how limited and how important and scarce Bitcoin is. I don't, I know there's some specifics going on around the convertible debt and break evens and all of that. But to me, that's at its heart what it is. So I like that. I wouldn't talk now about the valuation of that. I don't know what a company that does that. It's not really an operating business. Maybe it turns into more of an operating business when he has all that Bitcoin. I don't know. But at its root, it's really basic, right? It's a supply demand mismatch.
Scale is shaking up the blockchain game. With a gas-free and visible experience, it's the perfect solution for developers and users alike. Forget unpredictable fees. Scale's innovative model ensures smooth, cost-free transactions, saving users over $9 billion so far. With over 46 million active wallets, Scale is proving itself as the go-to blockchain for gaming, AI, and more. Explore the Scale ecosystem at skale.space/ecosystem and follow their journey on X at Scale Network. This episode is sponsored by Ledger. This Black Friday, Ledger is offering an incredible deal to secure your digital assets. From November 29th to December 5th, upgrade to Ledger Flex and get $70 in Bitcoin. Plus, save up to 40% on select Ledger Nano wallets and accessories. These deals are only available while supplies last, so don't wait. Visit Ledger's website at ledger.com today to take advantage of the best offers of the year and protect your assets with the global leader in digital asset security. Meet your secure, reliable institutional crypto partner, Kraken Institutional. Whether you're an asset allocator, a trading firm, or high net worth individual, Kraken Institutional unlocks the full suite of tools you and your organization need to trade and manage crypto at scale. But it's more than just powerful products. It's about enabling you to build and grow your crypto practice via deep liquidity, industry-leading security, and white glove service. Think 24/7 support from an award-winning account management team and expert guidance through your institutional crypto journey, from onboarding to product demos and more. Experience it for yourself. Visit kraken.com/institutions and get in touch today. This is not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss and is offered to U.S. customers through Payward Interactive Inc. View legal disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures. So maybe we can get a little bit deeper into how you're viewing the markets as they stand today. I'm curious, do you use a lot of your global macro knowledge to feed into how you're viewing the cycle in terms of bullish dynamics in Bitcoin and the crypto space? And how are you thinking about that today in terms of price in relation to what you're seeing on the macro side of things?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of knowing where we are in the cycle, absolutely. I mean, you use your old, you never can quite get rid of your old hat, looking at, we have the payroll number this week. But I don't really, that really doesn't matter so much. I think interest rates in the US are still drifting down. US is slowing. Europe and China are softer. There's not really any inflation threat. I know the cost of things is still high when you go to the grocery store, et cetera. But from the Federal Reserve perspective, from an institutional perspective, I don't really think inflation is a threat. And so I think, the interest rates probably head down to about, 3% in the US. That's probably where they should be, over the next year or so. And I mean, I think that's the backdrop. It's a positive liquidity backdrop. I do think, and this is the first time I've thought this in a long time, I do think that the dollar, which I thought was going to begin a bear market, I actually think with this Trump administration, it is so pro-capitalist. It's so pro-innovation. You're going to have tremendous inflow to the US. So the dollar, I think, could strengthen quite significantly. And that will also take the wind out of the inflation sails. And I think it's possible for us to really have a big dollar move here. This is a very new view on my part, but I just don't see the other countries around the world doing anything close to what we're doing. I mean, the Doge, for instance, we're going to have a Department of Government Efficiency, fiscal, tightening maybe, or let's say fiscal consolidation. Europe and China are not attempting fiscal consolidation, right? Those are the two other big blocks. So, and I don't think there's even a chance for them to do it. Like the US is streamlining and will streamline its entire government apparatus. Just think about that. How bullish is that for corporate America? Think about all those dollars that get wasted in government. And now they're going to be in the private sector. the equity market in the US, even though it's had two phenomenal years, is going to explode up. So that to me is a very dollar bullish event, and therefore also, I think, positive for inflation. And then we'll keep interest rates low because we do have a big deficit that we need to fund, and theoretically it would be better to fund it at lower interest rates. So I think a strong dollar would play into that. And in terms of cryptocurrency, again, I don't think there's anything more positive than the turn that's happened in the US. We actually have the most important government, the wealthiest government, the richest man in the world, who've all decided, in one go that we're going to be a pro crypto government. I mean, it's just, it's the fastest change, certainly I've ever experienced.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts on that dollar dynamic. It's quite interesting. This is a bit of a two-pronged question, but obviously, we've seen the dollar index surge at the same time that we've seen Bitcoin surge, and typically they've been inversely correlated. And so my question there is also around: do you feel like crypto needs a rate cutting cycle to do well? Because when I hear dollar higher
Yeah.
at the yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't really think so. You know, if you look back the last 10 years, the dollar is down 99% against Bitcoin. In fact, all assets in the fiat world, people don't really think about it this way, but if you go back 10, 12 years, the NASDAQ is down 99% against Bitcoin because it started from a low base. And, but if you look at the entire digital asset world, so all of the cryptocurrencies, I said in 2019, the entire value of the whole space was 300 billion, and today it's 5 trillion. So the entire digital asset space is up 15x. Nasdaq's not up 15x. Nothing is up. Like, that's just since 2019. So all assets in the fiat world, where supply of fiat is nearly unlimited, will go down against assets in the digital asset world. And so I don't see that correlation mattering so much. But I think the dollar can have a big run up. That's like 10, 15, 20%. That's not against the euro. That's not massive.
hmm And it's going up for positive reasons, right? It's not going up because of a flight to safety.
Yeah,
It's because of American exceptionalism.
I think so. And I think that's happening. I just look at the Brussels government. Could you ever see them streamlining anything? And people, are they going to bet against Elon and Vivek? I would. In China, I mean, forget it. The bureaucratic administration or administrative process. I mean, that's what the whole culture is about. So um, it's kind of crazy. Like I think Andreessen talked about this recently, just how unbelievably bullish everything feels. It feels so bullish that it's almost doesn't feel real. Uh,
Yeah,
because
no kidding.
you know, we've never really had, I would say, a pure capitalist government, a government run by people who've run businesses. Reagan was unbelievable, but he was an actor. That wasn't, he was great for the economy, and it was a fantastic turnaround from the Carter years, but he wasn't really a business person. And the people in the administration back then, they were Republican. They had Republican values and they were pro-business, but it's not like this administration. So it's almost, it's just, I don't want to say I've been waiting my whole life for this, but in some ways, yeah. I mean, the Treasury Secretary is someone I know. I haven't spoken to him for a few years, but he was a global macro guy. And, he worked with the guy who I used to work with. And, he's a phenomenal guy. I've been hoping for a global macro mind in there at Treasury or at the Fed my whole life. Like, I never understood, Powell is a private equity guy.
100%.
That was
Yeah.
his background. And Greenspan was great, but he was an economist. Bernanke, I thought was only so-so. Now we have a chance to make, they're talking about Warsh coming in, who's been at the Fed already, but he's a global macro guy, investor and analyst. And of course, his work for Druckenmiller, who is, well known and, you know, at the top of the heap there. So it's incredible that we finally have these people running the government. I
Totally.
just,
It feels, this is actually something I talked about with Raul yesterday as well, but it feels like, from basically 2008 until almost maybe a couple years ago, it felt like, we were in this world of secular stagnation. GDP was kind of sluggish and we were papering it over with QE and debt growth. But now it feels like we don't even, like, to our point I talked about earlier, feels like we don't need that stuff as much anymore because we have pure productivity led economic growth now.
well, we haven't had it yet. It's just that,
No.
yes, we
Yeah.
will have pure productivity led, technology driven. I mean, we haven't even talked about, AI and robotics and all of these, innovations that, Kathy Wood has a great, if you go to their website, they have an innovations focus. And we're not even talking about all those things, right? That's all bonus. So it's hard to be more positive, but you know what? Unfortunately, when you have been in the markets a long time, the times where I get a little nervous is I'm so massively bullish, I don't even see any negatives out there. And that usually it marks some kind of top. However, it doesn't feel like a top to me. Like it doesn't feel like we're there. But, what are the risks? I just don't see that many risks compared to all of the sort of positive things.
Yeah, like maybe inflation reacceleration, but again, you have an administration that just wants to get oil down to sub $50.
People would normally say, oh, war, bolts out of the blue, a September 11th type event. I just don't see that kind of thing. We've already done all those things. I feel like you're right. From '08, we had like 10 years of slogging through all sorts of stuff, right? Imagine like how much, not just innovation, but the savings of having everything on a blockchain, like having one or several unified ledgers that were not controlled by anybody, but held all of sort of the world's information. And you had these massive validating networks where you have thousands of people validating transactions independently, not one single bank or not one single source or whatnot. I mean, just think about the red tape, all that.
Yeah, and like the efficiency of settlement of assets.
And instantaneous. So
Yeah.
I told you about the problem I was having right before this, right?
I wasn't going to bring it up, but if you are,
Don't bring it up. Don't bring it up. Don't bring it up. But I mean, we're still like living with 20th century residual, call it frameworks and processes. I think it's very exciting. It feels to me like Gen X kind of, people between, I think that's like 35 and 55 or 40 and 60 or something like that, have kind of taken the reins here a little bit. I know Trump is leading the way, and I don't I don't have any desire to fan the intergenerational fires, but the boomers did have a certain way of doing things, and they did have an outlook and a perspective. And I think the Gen X group, which I'm in, has a different sort of more libertarian type of bent. Like we grew up during Reagan. Like Reagan was our president. If you're a business person and you're around, your mid 50s, and you really remember that it wasn't good in the 70s. And then you remember how good it was in the 80s. And I think that, that mentality, sort of more libertarian, a little more socially liberal. I mean, Elon is not some social conservative, or maybe a social centrist, I would, call it. But then, of course, freeing business from the shackles of government and regulation. I think that's going to be a really big focus, and this feels to me a little more of a Gen X type mentality, right? I don't know if you have any views on that. I mean, the cultural change feels really big. You've got Andreessen and Joe Rogan and Elon and Peter Thiel and all of these PayPal guys. It's also much more technology uh, focused.
Yeah, it's quite like I feel like the Gen Z and the Gen X are sort of they feel closely tied versus the millennials and the boomers are a bit more of the opposite end. So there's that interesting dynamic where they're kind of it almost feels like they're kind of joining forces in a way.
Yeah, it does. And the country needed it. I mean, there are too many old people in very high positions. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren. I mean, this is a joke. Those people are a joke. Um, you know, Anybody in their 30s, really, anybody is better than some of those people who we had 30s and 40s running things before.
Yeah, totally. Well, just as we wrap up here, we'd just love to hear any final parting thoughts for those that are, heavy on the macro side, heavy on the TradFi side, maybe dipping their toes in the water a little bit on the digital asset side as they're starting to see more and more talk about it in this new administration.
Yeah, I would just say that, try not to get caught up in the FOMO and in the emotion of it. These cryptocurrency markets, blockchain, Web3, digital assets, however you want to call them, they are the future. And I really think you have to take a long-term view. If you come into the space and, you're looking to get rich quick, yeah, some people do that. But you really need to be thinking, okay, I'm using Bitcoin, ETH, or those are the two core assets in the space as a savings technology. It's a 10-year minimum hold, right? I think it's not, and I like the dollar cost average method. Every month, just put some percent into Bitcoin. Get a wallet on Kraken or Coinbase or Gemini. Start to use a digital wallet, start to get comfort with buying and selling, and then storing as I said, your savings and thinking about it long term. That's the number one most important thing for people who are not in the space is you must come in with a long term view. And because you can have a 3-year view and be very wrong. And these markets can be very volatile. And in some cases, especially with some of the smaller cryptocurrencies, they're very experimental and it's more really, I would call it venture capital, and you can get wiped out. And so I don't suggest that anybody start with that and just come in, start small. And then once you have your wallet and you watch Bitcoin, and I think we could probably I've been calling for 170,000 this cycle, but everyone is telling me that's too conservative.
Wow.
I know it's only a double from here.
Only,
You're like,
Jeez.
damn, that's a bull market for ants. Like, what are you kidding me? 300, 400. I don't want to get too crazy with expectations, but I tell you on a 5 to 10-year view, certainly Bitcoin could be, north of 500,000. And yeah. And so I think just start slowly. That would be
nice.
my
Well said. Well, Dan, it's great to finally get you on the show. Really enjoyable to have you here.
My pleasure.
Looking for a blockchain that combines high performance with zero headaches? Scale is your answer. With its advanced parallel processing and modular sharding, Scale delivers gas-free transactions and limitless scalability, perfect for gaming, AI, and consumer-facing dApps. Already a top 10 blockchain on dApp radar, Scale is powering next-gen use cases with over 750 million transactions and counting. Discover the future of Web3 at skale.space/ecosystem and stay up to date with their journey on X at Scale Network.